Understanding light size is one of the simplest, yet can be one of the most effective things you can learn when it comes to lighting. So when I talk about light size, I'm talking about the physical size of the thing that is emitting light. So it could be scaling a lamp which has an emission on it. It could be changing the size of a lamp, a spot lamp or an area lamp, anything like that. Or it could actually even just be anything that's reflecting light, like bouncing light. If you've got a small light that's bouncing off a large wall, well, then you have a large light source. So the difference between a small light source and a big light source is that when a light source is small, it creates sharp shadows. However, when the light source is bigger, it creates smoother, softer shadows. And the reason this happens is that with a bigger light source, it's reaching more, right? So with this larger plane here, the light is actually wrapping around the cylinder and light is hitting parts of that shadow that was there previously, and it's now being filled in with light. So you get this softened effect. Whereas that point, like right where it's darkest there, is where the light, there's actually no light that's actually able to reach that fine point there. And this is all relative to how close the light is to the subject. So if we've got this big light source here right in front of this sphere, and you can see it's creating that very smooth shadow on the floor. But this is because from the point of view of that sphere, like if there was a camera right where that sphere is, the lamp would take up about this much size in relation to how close it is. But if we moved that light back, and then we increased its brightness so we could still see it, you can see that the shadow is now sharp. So it's not necessarily the size of the lamp, it's the size of the lamp in relation to how close it is to the object. And the best example of this is the Earth. So the sun is 330,000 times bigger than the Earth. But because of how far away we are from the sun, in our sky, it only takes up a very small little point of light in our sky. And therefore on Earth, we see very hard, very sharp shadows at noon, at least. So yeah, so that's the difference that this can make. And what's interesting is that as an artist, we can use this to our advantage to emphasize different things. Like say we have this rock here and it's lit by this very large light source. Well, if we were to use a smaller light source, then you can see that we're actually able to see more details of that rock because the light is reaching less area and therefore there is more shadow being introduced and these smaller details are becoming more pronounced. So when it's larger, it's filling in those shadows and we're sort of able to take in more of its form. But when it's smaller, we're seeing, we're focusing more on those small details and like the crevices and all of that extra detail in there. So when it comes to lighting humans, can you guess what is most desirable? Not the small light source, that's for sure. When you use a small light, it emphasizes all the wrong things. It basically brings out all the bad things. The skin imperfections, the pimples, the creases, the lines in the face, all those things that you don't want. When you use a larger light source, it fills that in. So this is why whenever you have a portrait photographer, they are going to be using a large light source. They're going to take, they're not going to be using just a single flash. They're going to take that flash and they're going to put it through a large diffusion filter of some sort, such as a softbox, which has like this translucent film, which basically stretches that light to be that size. And in this case, by the way, this softbox was absolutely massive. It was like 1 meter by 1 meter, absolutely huge softbox. But you can see the difference that this makes to the image there. And not only with the smoothing of the shadows, but you can see like you're actually able to read the image better on the right there, because on the left you've got these like really distracting shadows, like really hard differences between the light and the dark. So you've got these odd shapes, this little shapes in the face that you're not seeing on the softened effect. Exact same thing with outdoor lighting. If you're photographing in on a cloudless, clear day, especially at noon, then you're going to be seeing this hard pinprick light source, which is going to make those hard shadows. do it on an overcast day or through a cloud, and that cloud then becomes basically that white diffusion filter, which is going to make everything feel softer. And look at the difference. Like, not only like the creases and the crow's feet of my eyes there, the little crevices, like any imperfections, freckles, little dimples in my skin, they're all coming out there. And you've got these really distracting, like this triangle shape in there. Very, very distracting. Whereas on the right-hand side, you don't see any of those distracting shapes, and all those imperfections have basically become erased. And not only that, but also because it's not sunlight, my eyes are actually able to open up more because I don't have to squint as much. So very much more desirable to shoot in an overcast day than in a sunlight, right? So in movies, they typically shoot with soft lighting, even in cases where it doesn't make sense for the scene. Like in this one from Gone Girl, this was in a police station, with like typical like fluorescent lights. But then when you look at the characters, it's got this smooth lighting on their face, right? So they've definitely used some sort of softbox or some large light source there to create this effect. However, they do use sharper light when it makes sense for the scene, like when Ben Affleck discovers that his wife is missing or whatever. They use this split light, again, going mysterious, what's happening, and it's harder to, again, exaggerate that hard light there. But also, I believe, and I've seen this, it actually is used when you want to emphasize emotion, like the creasing, like the furrowing of the brow. It brings out those details more when you've got a harder light source. I'm not sure if you can see it there. But anyways, so that's movies. However, you can go too far. So yes, a larger light source is preferable to a smaller one, but you can go too far. You can go so big that you actually erase so much shadow that it's less readable. As we spoke about in part 1, shadow is important to understand an image and to read the form of things. If you use a light that's so big that it's filling in everything, you're not able to see it as well. To give you an example, I don't want to criticize this photographer, but I did purchase this off iStock Photo, so I do feel like I paid him some cash, right? I feel this would be improved if either the light position or the size of the light was decreased. This, because it's so big, the detail on the left side of her nose there, our left, you can see it's almost being erased there. It's almost blending in with the rest of the face because there's no shadow there to help us understand that. So this could be improved with a smaller light source or a different direction. The other interesting thing about using a light source that's too big is that you can have an unintended effect of actually removing skin texture. So in both of these examples, the person looks, I mean, we call it airbrushing, and it probably has been airbrushed in both of these cases, but also the light it's so light that, as you remember, it's going to erase imperfections and small details. So that skin texture has been erased, essentially. And in both of these cases, it can have a sort of fake feeling. It can feel as though, I don't know if this person is human or not. Particularly this one on the right here, it almost looks like a doll. Like, it's so buttery, smooth, and velvety, it almost looks like it's rubber. It doesn't look like a face. So yes, skin texture and imperfections are undesirable because it tends to signal aging. Yes, that's true, but it's also human. And when you don't have that, things can start to look not so human. As a side note, if you are going to be doing airbrushing or cloning and smudging and all this kind of thing, I recommend this tutorial actually shows you how you can do that and then use frequency separation in Photoshop to bring in some of those those skin textures back into it. Not really necessary for 3D work, but interesting for people who are doing a lot of Photoshopping perhaps. So I've noticed a lot of pro photographers will actually, to get around this, they will make the face moister. Like I just noticed it, like a lot of pro photographers, like the face is a lot wetter than normal. And I think that's part of it. But they're also using smaller light sources, using the direction quite well to get like highlights on the skin. Just the subtle things. I mean, you don't have to go crazy with it. More importantly is the direction, but you do want to have some of that skin texture in there. The other interesting thing I realized as I was going through this, I was trying to figure out, like, why does pro photography seem to have the best of both worlds? It seems to have sort of hard shadows, but then also soft shadows. And I realized it's partly to do with the light. Because in 3D software, our lamps look like this. Whether you've got an area lamp or a plane with an emission, it's a solid, constant white light, which doesn't really exist in the real world. Pro photographers use softboxes, which looks like this. And a softbox is a single point lamp that is being blasted out and it's hitting this white sheet, which is translucent. And yes, it does tend to look like, you know, a solid white object from some angles, but it's not like solid white like this. It's actually more kind of like this. It's like a gradient. It's a hot spot right in the middle, especially when you like drop the exposure down, you can really see it. It's a hot spot in the middle, and then it gradually fades out towards the edges. So just as a test, I decided to see if I could create this in Blender and whether it would have an effect. I added an emission shader, and then I gave it a gradient texture set to spherical and set to a texture coordinate of object. And then I just used a color ramp to try to replicate that softbox, you know, hot light in the middle and then fade it out towards the edges. And this is how it looks with just a constant white plane. And then this is how it looks with the gradient. And I think you'd agree it looks far better with the gradient. And the part of that is because the light is reaching in less places, but I think it's also because you're getting a hot white spot in the center, which is giving you some harder shadows, and then it's fading out and it's giving us that softer shadow towards the edge there as well. And the reason I tried it was to see if it would improve the skin texture, and slightly, just very, very slightly. I maybe in different examples you would see more of that hot spot in the reflection of the skin. But overall, it definitely looked better. And the other bonus as well that I didn't expect for, but it came out well, was that it creates a circular highlight in the sky, in the eye, as opposed to a blocky highlight, because you typically, a square shape can just look distracting in an eye. Having something that's smaller and rounder in like the top eye is going to be much more desirable. So it did that as well. But, you know, cool little tip, little trick. So, yes, it is generally desirable for characters to use a soft, large light source. But that is only because you're trying to emphasize beauty, and beauty is closely related to youth. And youth tends to have less skin imperfection, so you're trying to hide that skin imperfection, right? However, this isn't to say that every character should always have soft light. It depends on the character, because sometimes you've got a character like this. A grizzly, muscly looking thing, lots of detail, not to do with youth at all, not to do with beauty at all. It's masculine and it's got all this detail in it. In that case, you would use a hard light source to really amplify all that detail, because then you're going to be catching those tiny little shadows in the little creases and the veins and all that stuff. This is why every creature sculptor that knows what they're doing is going to be using a hard light source like this. They're going to use a hard sun lamp, because then that's going to amplify all that effort they did. If this guy, Damien Goumont, went to all the trouble of sculpting this, but then used a large light source, he'd be filling in all that work that he did. All those shadows would be filled in, and you wouldn't be able to see those details anymore. They wouldn't pop, they would be sort of subdued, and his work wouldn't look as good. So this is why it's important to know when to use one over the other. And when it comes to landscape photography, as I mentioned at the start, the sun in our sky is a very small little point source. On a clear day, obviously, but mostly at noon as well, because when the sun is highest in the sky, it's not passing through too many air particles. But as the sun retracts and reclines in the sky, particularly when it passes over the horizon, and you get basically some light that's still shooting up, and it's hitting those air particles in the sky. Those air particles are essentially becoming one big giant softbox, right? The light source is now this giant patch of sky. The same thing will happen with an overcast sky, but the added bonus of it being in the afternoon is you also get a change of color and really directional looking shadows. So the difference in landscape photography is the difference between this taken at noon and this taken in the golden hour, which is what this period is called. It's typically an hour after sunrise or an hour before sunset. So at noon, you can see that the form has sort of been flattened from above, and it's bringing out a lot of those tiny, minute details there. Whereas in the golden hour, it's obviously filling in light at a much more extreme angle across, which is typically desirable for landscape because you also get like elongated shadows across landscapes. It's getting a smoother fall off, so you can amplify form a little bit better. Exposure's a little bit better as well. Like you can get more of the sky with the landscape as well because they're kind of more almost the same. Very interesting, and this is so desirable for landscape photography that I read in a book that photo editors at big magazines won't even consider looking at any landscape work if it's not shot at dawn or dusk. And in the book, he went on to describe, he met someone at a conference who said, I think they were photographing for National Geographic or something, and they said, I showed them my work, and I was like, okay, so here's all the golden hour photos that you asked for, and then I've also got some extra ones here. They weren't photographed in the golden hour, but I think you'll like them. And they're like, no, don't worry, don't bother. We're not gonna buy them, right? Like, it's such a strict rule that they are just, the golden hour is the one time to take landscape photography, and they won't even accept anything outside of that. Pretty extreme, but anyway. However, there are exceptions. It depends on the work you're doing. When we made this image for the Rock Essentials, we wanted to exaggerate and show off the detail that we had in these rocks that we created, these detailed geometric shapes with hard little tiny amounts of detail. So the artist, Guilherme Henrik, used a very small point light at a directional angle, which really amplified those shadows and made them sharp and brought out the tiny details as opposed to the larger details. And all of that helped to sell the scene. This wouldn't be anywhere near as effective if it was like an overcast day or like a sunset with a soft light, anything like that. This works well for this specific case. So it all depends. What do you want to emphasize? If you want to emphasize beauty, youth, then you're going to go for a larger light source to fill in those shadows and make it look smoother. If you want to go for form, landscape, if you want to bring out some of that, then yes, you would also use that large light source. However, if you want to amplify the finer details, then you would use a smaller light source. So it's very easy to remember. Small light source, gonna amplify smaller details. Larger light source is gonna amplify the larger details. So that is it, guys. Part 2, size. So very simple to learn, very easy to remember, and just knowing when to use one over the other can have a big impact on your work. So that's part 2. Go ahead now and join me in part 3, and we are going to be discussing all about color. Very exciting. So hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up before clicking the next video there, and I will see you there. Bye.